if you ever want to know what God thinks or what God's will is, there are certain tests that you can go through or to determine if something is God's will. And one of the tests is to recognize that you and I are created in the image of God. We're very different than the rest of creation. So there are certain things about God that we can learn by looking at ourselves, especially when you consider what is God's will. So you can ask yourself the question, if he's my father, and I've asked him for this, he wouldn't give me this bad thing over here. So here's one of the ways that you can know God's will, because you're created in the image of God. What would you want for your children? What would you want for your children? What you want for your children is something that you get because you are created in the image of God. So if your child were to come and ask you for a fish, you would never give them a snake, would you? No, and the reason that you wouldn't is because you're a reasonably good person and you're created in the image of God. So if your child asked you for health, you would never, because of your great love for them and wanting to teach them something, you would never give them cancer, would you? You would never do that. The reason you wouldn't do that is because you're created in the image of God. So as a parent, we're very unique in the creation. So for instance, we, unlike the rest of the creation, we want to bless our children. And so we get excited about things like birthday parties, Christmas, vacations. How many of you have ever taken your kids on a vacation which was pure misery to you, but you did it because they loved it? Am I the only one? Yeah, we've all done that. Why do you do that? Well, because you're created in the image of God, and we do those things. Now, the animal kingdom, they never get excited about their offspring's birthday parties. They don't care. It's not part of who they are, but you're created in the image of God. So we, because we're created in the image of God, we want to do things like we want to provide for our children. We want our kids to have all that they need. I mean, is there any parent here who hopes that your child just never has all that they need? Are there any here who say, I just want you to struggle through life and relationships? Well, none of us would do that. Well, where do you get that from? You get that because you're created in the image of God. The animal kingdom really doesn't care, but you do because you're created in the image of God. And so sometimes we do things because we're created in his image that we go the extra mile for our kids. This past week, so it was probably about a month ago, my son Sunday, he loves to fish, and he's 13. And so I get him this fishing pole, and so he goes out to fish. And what he does is he gets the hook on and he gets the bait on, and he throws right out into the water. And then he decides, I'm just going to let it wait for a few minutes, see if anything catches, on that. But he doesn't secure the fishing pole. So he comes back a little bit while later and finds out that he had actually landed a very big fish. How did he find out? Well, the fish took the bait and it took the fishing pole too. So there's no more fishing pole. Am I the only one who's ever been through this? So we have no more fishing pole. So Sunday comes to me and goes, Dad, I lost my fishing pole and I need to get another fishing pole. Now I could say to him, well, that's just a lesson you got to learn. You got to grow up. I'm going to make you pay for this. Yeah, I could do that. Or I could say, sounds like a trip to Bass Pro to me. Which I think you parents will agree, especially you dads, Bass Pro is better than Disney World. It's cheaper, and your kids can spend hours walking around there. So my kids go to the fishing area. I go to the gun place to make sure that they're stocked just in case. So he wants a new fishing pole. Now, I will tell you this. He comes to me with this fishing pole, and the fishing pole is $139. So with tax and everything, it's going to be $150. To which I say, Sunday, I love you so much. Just not quite that much. Now, so we settled on a fishing pole that was somewhat cheaper, not because I don't want to bless them, but I have this sneaky suspicion that this is probably not the last fishing pole I'm going to wind up buying. Can you parents relate to that? So we did that. Yeah, some of you, yeah, absolutely, you know. So parents, let me ask you a question. How many times have you had to bail your kids as they grow up out of a bad situation? And you do that because they're your kids and you love them. And sometimes they make a mess. And yet as parents, because you're created in the image of God, you step in and you do what you have to do. So Jesus is sharing this concept, how we're to relate to God with a very Jewish crowd. This is very foreign. Well, later on, as the gospel goes out into the pagan world, which is very different than the Jewish world. So Paul writes to the church in Rome, where most people are coming from a very pagan background. They worship gods like Zeus and Apollos and Aphrodite and things like that. And Paul says this, there in your outline, to former people who were formerly pagan. He says, you have received the spirit of adoption as sons and daughters, by which we cry out, Abba, Father. In every language, the first words that our children learn to speak are always very basic. So in their language, it would be Abba. In our language, it would be Dada or Papa, whatever it is in that language. It's always very basic. So the idea, when you went and you spoke to the pagans who were becoming Christians, it'd be a very concept to them that God wanted to be our Father. He wanted to have that relationship, because in the Greek and Roman gods, universally, they never viewed the people who worshiped them as part of their family. You didn't worship them because you loved them. You worshiped, there was a whole system based upon appeasement. You sacrificed to those gods so that they would not destroy your crops. And that's why you sacrificed. And then they believed that they sacrificed a lot. Maybe, just maybe, those gods might return a favor and answer a prayer. But those gods never talked about becoming part of their family and loving their people. It just wasn't even a part of their concept. So Paul comes along, and the others also, and begins to talk about a God who wants you to become part of his family, his children, and he wants to relate to us in that way.